1963 was a very significant year, and there was a great deal of tragedy as well as triumphs, I think, not only in the civil rights community and in the African American community, but more importantly also within the country. Everything from the letters from the Birmingham jail, the death of Medgar Evers in 1963, and then, of course, we had the significant March on Washington. And a lot of people might not realize this, but that was very controversial. The fact that the civil rights leaders got together and decided that they were going to bring groups of people to Washington to really march and to really protest about how African Americans were being treated and the lack of access that they had, particularly around the right to vote. And the President of the United States at the time, John Kennedy, strongly encouraged them not to march, and they decided that they were going to march anyway. And with all due respect, Mr. President, we feel that this is a very important step for us to take in our struggle with civil rights. And they decided to proceed. And they actually got some pretty strong commitments, not only from the president and not only from legislators around the country, but that they were going to take a look at the Voting Rights Act that started in 1963. It wasn't signed until 1964 with Lyndon Johnson, but the notion that we needed to have a Voting Rights Act actually started in 1963. The March on Washington was very historic, and I think not only past civil rights leaders, but the new generation of civil rights leaders, and I'd probably put myself in that generation, we look back on that with great envy. Because I don't believe that we have ever been able to come together as a unified group to really pursue the rights of a group of people in such a way that occurred on that day. And the historic speech that we all grew up listening to in elementary school and high school, and we recite and use portions of that speech over and over and over again as civil rights leaders. And so it's made a lasting impact. In some ways, we often recount that time and look back on it fondly, but then there's also a great sense of sadness, at least for me personally, because we've not been able to duplicate that march since then. And we've made tremendous strides. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but we certainly have a long way to go. And when you look at what's going on in our country today with Voting Rights Act, the very rights that Dr. King marched and so many civil rights leaders marched and died for that are now in jeopardy. And we have to, I think, become re-energized and refocused. We all plan to gather again in Washington, D.C. for that march to reenact that wonderful historic day. And I think you will see a different purpose because of everything that's recently happened with the Voting Rights Act and what's happening with women's rights and civil rights in this country. And maybe this is exactly what we need to really not just celebrate the 50th anniversary, but also make it meaningful and make sure that we are carrying out the work of Dr. King and the other civil rights leaders that participated on that day. I believe what resonates with me today from the March of 1963 is it was the blueprint for marches to follow. Other civil rights organizations, other ethnic groups have decided that when you want to get the attention of the world and your congressional leaders, that you have a right as a citizen of this country to march peacefully and to protest and to make your voice heard. And it was the one great march that we look back on. It started a movement of civic engagement that otherwise probably would not have taken place.